Jack. Here we are. So I watched 60 Minutes 10 years ago. You were on 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
And you were on track to become a university professor, right? Chemistry professor?
That was way before 60 Minutes. Yeah, that was in East Germany. I was guaranteed a job as a tenured professor because my grades were that good. I was at the top of the class. And the first 10 out of 75 were allowed to go on and get a doctorate. But then it got really tight. And in my case, I was hired as an assistant professor before anybody else. They were still working on their doctorate. Mine was accelerated. I was just a superstar, so no doubt. I would have been a teaching professor, not so much a research professor. I'm actually much better teaching than doing, the science itself. And I found that out by myself. I can learn, but not so much do.
What do you think you're drawn to from the teaching aspect? What do you love about the teaching? Why do you think you're so good at it? However you want to answer that.
Well, it's got to be genetic somehow because my parents were both teachers. And I also had, particularly in elementary school, I had two outstanding teachers, one male and one female. The female was like a grandmother, and I admired both of them. And somehow, I don't know. And then the other thing, as I got a little older, like middle school and particularly high school, I decided to tutor weaker students to really learn the subject. And that is what a lot of people don't understand. You learn best by teaching, because once you can explain it, you got to know it. So and so it partially in my blood and partially, well, it's also in my blood because I was born an extrovert, and I was actually a happy-go-lucky, extremely extrovert to a point that I was disruptive in class, as a class clown. But then I took this huge detour into introversion because as illegal lone wolf agent, you can't get too close to a bunch of people, and you don't want to be out there in the public and doing what I'm doing now and gesturing and talking. And then after I became a public figure after the 60 Minutes, and it took a while to reconnect with my old self, and now you can't shut me up.
I love it. Well, that works for this medium.
Yeah.
So the agent that something meant to your school? Is this how the Stasi?
I was done with my studies, which was the dumbest cover story that I've ever experienced in intelligence, because he didn't even know how our country worked. People did not recruit. You were assigned jobs after you had your degree. So what I thought immediately, because the cover story didn't make any sense, light bulb went on and says, Stasi, East German secret police, because he was German. But there's no way that I could have even remotely guessed that he wasn't Stasi. But I knew he was, but he wasn't. He was a collaborator. The KGB had volunteers amongst the German citizens, and he was one of those. And we were talking back and forth, a lot of small talk. And I just accommodated him because I knew there wouldn't be anything negative, because I was in very good standing. I was already a superstar. I had not violated anything. I was not guilty of anything. So it could only be some kind of an offer. Why not listen? Well, he didn't make any offer. He just took me to a restaurant the next, where he introduced me to somebody he called Herman. And Herman was right there next to him at the table, except Herman sounds German, Hermann, he said. And when Herman opened his mouth, he had an accent. So at that point, I knew I was with KGB. And the German fellow who's never introduced himself, he, with any kind of a name, it could have been a false name, no name, he just said, well, I got to go. You're going to be working with our Soviet comrades. So that's when I knew that I was being approached by the KGB. If I say recruited, we're going too far ahead, because they were looking for a certain type of person for a certain job, and that type of person is very rare. It requires close to a dozen character traits that need to be all present, and that's rare. It's not better than anybody else. It's not worse. It's just rare to find. And they took 18 months to study me because all they knew there were two things. I had to be a flaming communist, which I was. I was a party member, was active in the communist youth movement, and I had the greatest grades that you can have. I aced the whole thing. Yeah, there was nobody with regard to test taking and test results. There was nobody even a close second. I remember we had once a written exam that was given to all of us at the same time, a very lengthy exam, and as a result, I got an A, and the next best grade was a C.
Oh my goodness!
What can I tell you? So that's what, and that's not bragging, you know. I not only was I smart, but I had very, very good study habits, because that's how you find your gaps and you close the gaps. You know what you know. And I walked into every exam totally confident, as opposed to everybody else. I knew exactly what I knew. And I also guessed very well what might be on the exam. So it isn't just smarts, okay? It's cleverness as well. So anyway, that's what the KGB knew. And the rest of it, they didn't know if I was fearless. They didn't know that I didn't have a problem with change. They didn't know that I wouldn't mind leaving the family, a promising career, and go start someplace else as an illegal. They didn't know that I had language talents, and they didn't know that I had the ability to lie on the spot. That means being very, very competent in fluid situations. So, you know, because this very often it happens when you are, you know, you're living a lie and somebody asks you a question that you haven't thought about before. Now you got to answer it. It has to be consistent with your cover story. They checked all of that. They also checked whether I would be able to perform elicitations, which was it was an exercise I didn't like. That means you have to go and make contact with a stranger and find some information that they were interested in, such as the KGB was interested in a West German citizen at one time and they wanted to know when he's going to come to visit. So I had to knock on the door of a house. I didn't know. I knew the name of the person that would come out, and then I had to make conversation and find the information. And I did. So that's where the lying comes in, right? Because I introduced myself as a sociology student, and I had a questionnaire. And I asked her if she would, I'm doing a survey, and I asked her if she would answer a few questions, and nobody says no to that when a student comes along. And then I skillfully moved the directions to a point where she would actually volunteer that she had a relative. Well, that gave me an opening and I remember this as if it was yesterday, because I hated doing this, but I did it really well. Gave me an opening to ask a bunch of questions. Well, is he going to come visit? Yeah. We're really excited, blah, 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 blah. And apparently I also had something that's not on the list of what they were looking for. Likability, charm, call it whatever it is. I was not aware of it. I was just playing around. But apparently, you know, the feedback that I'm getting now from ex-classmates of mine, college and in high school, indicates that I was a likable guy. I was smart but not arrogant. And I played the guitar. I was the life of the party. So it's important when you're smart not to, and that's when I mentor smart people, it is very important that you don't carry this on your sleeves. Okay, let somebody else decide that you're smart. Do not telegraph it. That's the worst thing you can do, because then you're an a-hole and you will be avoided at all costs.
It's kind of the idea of when you're good, you let other people tell you you're good.
Exactly right. And it took me a long time where others that I really respected started telling me that I'm good, and that is when I left corporate America, because in corporations almost everybody plays a role. And so you don't know, you can't have really, really close friends that are also colleagues because they have their own agenda. And sometimes it may differ from yours. So that doesn't mean they're bad people. That's normal. It's human nature, right? You want to position yourself to get the maximum out of the situation. And that is not always aligned. If you have a friend who is outside of the workplace, whatever they tell you and how they advise you is most often very likely not unself. Okay, so when I stepped out of corporate and I collected a lot of good friends who I very much respect and even admire, and when I got the feedback from them, I said, and now I sort of embrace this, and I don't have to talk about it because I know that if I give that impression to multimillionaires who are really good people on top of it, very successful, then I'm good. So I don't have to play act at all.
You talked about your extroversion. Why do you think you hated doing the elicitation, like going up to somebody you didn't know?
Well, I was good at lying, but I really was at core very, very honest. My mother would tell other people that about my intrinsic honesty. And the other thing is, I was shy with strangers. Not anymore, but I was. But when I was in company of people where I knew why I was there, no problem. But with this elicitation, I lied about why I was there. So that made a difference. And the other thing is that when I started living as an American in the United States, I was always afraid that I might make a mistake. Even when the phone rang in my apartment, I was afraid to pick it up because, there was always something uncertain coming at me. So that's why I said I made this detour into introversion, and it started with elicitation.
What was the thought process in your mind? You've got this tenure track, university professor,
yeah.
and then this other opportunity comes out of left field. Like, how did you go about making that decision?
I tried to do it scientifically, and that didn't work. I used to do this for quite some time. So you take a piece of paper, you do 2 columns, and you write down decision. Column A is decision where there's only 2 alternatives. A is yes and B is no. And then you write down the impacts on all kinds of different things that could be impacted by these decisions. And then you assign numbers, values to them, how strong that impact might be and how much it might influence your life. And then you add it all up. And which column has the bigger number, you pick that. I never did. I never did. And this particular decision, I did the same thing, and it was inconclusive. And I went with my feelings, with my gut. And so the big things that were in favor of going with this was my ideology. I was going to help make the world a better place, and that's a very, very, very strong motivation for younger people. And I believed in this 100%. But then, in addition, I knew I would be able to travel to the West, which was practically not allowed to do for any normal, quote-unquote, normal East German citizen. Athletes were allowed to go, obviously, but they were supervised. And occasionally some scientists were allowed to go. But so travel to the West, and I really wanted to go to Paris, to Rome, and all these places. I'd read about them. The other thing was adventure. I am adventurous by nature. And as a child, I got injured a lot because I did things I wasn't supposed to do. I climbed a tree that was a little bit, wasn't really sturdy enough, but I just, let me see if I can, bam. It was just about 10 different injuries, all thankfully small, nothing disabling. Adventure was, and change. And, I got bored very easily. So all of this, the excitement was very interesting. And finally, I did know that the standard of living in the West was higher. And we had this legendary figure on TV, an East German who was the East German version of James Bond. So he went over to West Germany to hunt down Nazis, noble cause, right? And there were Nazis in West Germany. There were some that survived. There were even Nazis in the government. So we knew that and he did a good job, but he also in the process, he drove fancy cars. He had girlfriends, like more than one at the same time. Lived in. So I say, I get to get my cake and eat it too. So you put it all together, and that was too strong to not let go of two things that were important to me in East Germany. Number one was the career. I would have joined the ruling class, so to speak. Tenured professors were highly respected and well paid. And number two, give up the basketball team. If there's anything I had an absolute passion for, was the game of basketball. But what was beckoning on the other side of the wall was stronger than basketball, fundamentally. So there you go.
Oh my goodness. I used to work at Springfield College in Western Massachusetts, and that is the birthplace of basketball. It's where the game is invented by games and youth.
And when I had Chelsea, my daughter, who played Division I, she decided on her own, when she watched a basketball game on TV, she asked me what that was, and I said, she was maybe 7, 8 years old, and I said, well, it's called basketball. And she said spontaneously, I want to do that. So I now was behind her, with her, supported her every step of the way. So there was another 10 years of passion for basketball. In this case, it was women's basketball. Well, she made it to Division I, so.
Where did she end up playing?
Huh?
Where did she end up playing?
Oh, she ended up playing in Saint. It's a college outside of. Now I got some problems.
It's okay.
Thank God we were on Riverside.
Yeah.
Sometimes words don't pop into my head.
It's all good.
Outside of Altoona, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Saint Joseph's, but something Saint.
Yeah.
They were lower Division I, very good, very, very competitive in Division I. And, she got a good education. She started very well in life.
Yeah. So you come to the U.S. and you're by yourself.
Yeah.
Right? And you're like starting a life in essence. You're how old at the time?
I'm 28.
What was that like for you?
It was what it was. I was very lonely. Year one, I was totally by myself. All I had was the Jack Barsky birth certificate. I had no other documentation. I couldn't get a job. I clearly couldn't date or hang out with people because I couldn't answer a single question. Where do you live? Well, I lived in a single room occupancy hotel where you paid by the month. That was typically for odd characters, sometimes hookers, and just like where you pay in cash and nobody asks and one wants to know what you're doing. You don't show ID. So the first year, nothing. Then I got a job. I got a job as a bike messenger. Well, guess what? That's not something to, when you want to socialize, that's not something you can be very proud of. And I was very much aware that I could not impersonate a bike messenger, a native guy, because they're temporary. The people that they're vagrants. They're very often not very intelligent. So, the one thing I could not permanently alter is the twinkle in my eyes. I did that once for an interview on purpose, to rub the soap into my eyes so that they would become red. When I interviewed for a Social Security card. Yeah. Lonely, very much so. Even as a bike messenger, I had interaction with the folks in the office. That's when I got to see people, but I didn't date, and Occasionally, I went to a singles bar just to hang out and smoke a cigarette and have a drink, but I didn't get close to anybody. There was a good close to 5 years of loneliness.
Wow.
Until I went back to college. So 5 years, City University, New York. The only thing that made me somewhat of a misfit was I was tall and 10 years older than the average student. But other than that, it was like the United Nations. So, it wasn't just squeaky clean the United States like downtown Boston, for instance, right? Where everybody is white and speaks the same. So I felt a whole lot more comfortable, and I made some friends, and I still didn't have a steady girlfriend. That took a while until I had a real job. But, I was prepared for that, because and that may also have played a role when the KGB assessed me. I grew up in a suburb of a small town in East Germany, and it was just isolated. There were no friends to play with. There was no play dates. You couldn't be driven from here to there because there were no private vehicles. So I had to learn how to entertain myself, play by myself, read, find things to do. So while when I had an apartment, after this 1 year I was able to rent an apartment, I had a TV. I watched a lot of TV in the morning, soap operas, when I wasn't working, obviously. And in the evening, which was also necessary, because, you want to have knowledge of the pop culture, right? So you can make small talk. Watch TV, but I also spent a lot of time teaching two skills, teaching myself. I don't know what possessed me. I figured I had to learn how to type. So I bought myself one of those old mechanical typewriters and bought a Betty Owens, is it a Betty Owens book? Betty Owens used to skills for the office. And there I started typing, and at one point I copied a book that had all biographies of famous composers. Because the other thing I did to avoid loneliness, I bought myself a stack of music, long-playing records, all the rock and roll that we secretly listened to in East Germany that I could listen to now, and classical music. Music was very important for me to keep my emotional balance. And then to crown it, that I did a little later. That's when I was already in college. Or maybe, no, I was not in college yet. It was just at the end of my bicycle career. I had met a woman from Chile and had a brief, torrid love affair with her. Well, she was safe, right? She wasn't United States. She was a visitor. And she had shared with me that she was going to move to the United States. So I decided to surprise her. I taught myself Spanish. There wasn't any recordings that you could use. I just read and learned so I could read Spanish fluently. I can still understand, I can read the first page of a Spanish newspaper, but I never really learned to speak it. But what a surprise, huh? What a romantic notion. Because imagine how many hours I spent lovingly learning yet another Spanish word. I was able to read Spanish novels without a dictionary. I'm through and through an odd person, There is very little normal in my life, and it's not something I want to take credit for. Because a lot of this has to do with the wiring, how you function best, and how, in my case also how you survive a very, challenging life. See, I told you I can't talk all day, so I want to now give you an opportunity to ask another question.
So, the goal was for you to come over to the United States to get close to the National Security Advisor. Okay.
Now I forgot the Trilateral Organization. There's a left and a right-wing think tank. There's a couple of right-wing think tanks that they pointed out, and the Institute for Foreign Relations at Columbia University that was headed by the also National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, and that was a pipe dream. And I mentioned that and somebody misinterpreted this, and that knowledge is now all over the place. They would have loved me. That was not a task. It was like, it would be really great. That kind of a task to give was a pipe dream, period. And I couldn't get, based on my standing in society, I couldn't have gotten close to anybody like that. Down the road, yeah, but it took more than 10 years. In about 20 years since I came to the U.S., since I arrived at the U.S., I would have been able to mingle with people of the at least upper middle class for sure. So what I wasn't told explicitly, my number one task throughout was become an American and live in U.S. society deeply embedded, just in case diplomatic relations would be broken up altogether, because other than illegals, all the KGB agents in the U.S. were diplomats. So you throw them out, then there's no more KGB presence in the United States. And you put two and two together, there were 3 American citizens who were the most successful agents for the KGB because they were moles in several organizations, the Navy, the FBI, and the CIA. And they interacted with diplomats. That's how the secrets got to Moscow. If the diplomats aren't there, who was left? Us. I was never told, okay? I figured this out in hindsight. And I figured out a lot of things in hindsight. One of the things is that there was a good reason, and this is based on a memoir that I read that was written by Cherkassin, is his last name. He ran 2 of those moles, those American traitors. And he wrote in his memoir that the KGB was extremely distrustful of all their agents. Well, they had a good reason to be distrustful of somebody like me, because I could tell them anything. They were not watching me, because watching me, even from a distance, would have most likely created my arrest, right? So they shared with me the least amount of information that they thought I needed to know to do my job, because if I ever were to defect, I should know nothing. Not even methods and operations, nothing. And I was always in the dark, and the one thing I knew instinctively not to ask questions. I waited for them to tell me what they want to tell me, because I wasn't instinctively, I just felt like, and it's just like, by the way, it started asking one question early on where Herman got pissed off, I'm sorry for that word, but he really got annoyed. Because at one point I asked him, is your real name German? Because that would be the Russian version. And he looked at me and said, don't you ever ask any questions like this, ever again. So I learned my lesson. I just waited for them to tell me what to do, which was pointed out by somebody in the FBI. One of the individuals that interviewed me was I stepped out of my basic personality because I'm anti-authoritarian. I was obnoxiously anti-authoritarian. I almost got kicked out of high school. And here I just say, yes, sir, I'm going to do, we're going to do this instinctively, because if I buck up against the KGB, that wouldn't end very well. Instinct. It's all instinct. I didn't know how evil they were, but it's instinct that, because I knew that they were tough guys. And I knew they operated in a tough environment. So, there's some things you just can't teach. Instinct cannot be taught. However, acquiring an instinct, how you do it, can be taught. It just takes time. I was born with a lot of decent instinct, and then I acquired it because I am so incredibly curious. So I always took on a lot more information than most other people that were in the same situation, because I just wanted to know what's going on, particularly people, but also situations. And my subconscious, which fundamentally your instinct, right, which is also distributed from here to here. So when people, they say they have this gut feeling, there's something to it. So I acquired a lot of knowledge in my subconscious that then helped me make decent decisions. So I'm still here, right? I survived.
You came over to the U.S. in what year was that?
1978.
78. And you meet the FBI agent in what year?
That was 9 years after I quit the KGB. I quit in 88, so it's 97.
Yeah. And buddies with him today. Is that accurate? Or?
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. The lead agent on my case, by the name of Joe Riley, I can say his name. He's out in public. He wrote afterword for my book. He's also responsible for me being able to talk to you today because some of his superiors in the FBI wanted me in jail. And he talked them out of it because before they started talking to me, before anybody knew that I would cooperate, he had the instinct that I would cooperate because he found out just by watching me that I loved my family, and there's no greater incentive to change who you are and cooperate with what used to be the enemy than saving your family, never mind yourself. So yeah, he is the godfather for my last child too. Oh yeah, we're really good friends. We played golf together for many years until I moved out of where he lives. He lives in Pennsylvania, and I moved away from there.
Did you hit it straight down the fairway, both of you guys?
He was a better golfer. He's older than me, but the one thing is he cursed a lot, and I said the P word here in this interview. I cannot quote his curses. He got angry. He was a little angry golfer. I don't get angry a lot.
How do you think he was able to convince his superiors?
Well, he had a lot of evidence because he was watching me from a distance. He was stationed opposite my house in Pennsylvania on a pretty sizable hill, and he pretended to be a bird watcher and watched me interact with my children. And I did it a lot. I played with them outside, and he must have felt that I was hugging them, seen that I was hugging them, and that it was all me and the children. He knew there was a tension between me and the wife. And the other thing that they pretty much were certain of, but not 100% certain, was that I wasn't active anymore. There was no signs of me being active, but I could still be a sleeper, a long-term sleeper. If I'm a Russian, they didn't know my nationality. They didn't know where I was born. So if I'm a Russian, I could still be loyal to the Russian state. So I think Joe took a bit of a risk, paid off very well. He got a commendation by the director of the FBI for having influenced that decision because they got a lot of good information out of me. Yeah, well, like MO, methods and operations, what I experienced. They also studied me to figure out, what the character profile of an illegal like me. One time there was a 3-day session with two psychologists that threw every psych test at me that you could throw at me, including the ink blot test, and on and on and on. And so it's a lot of background information that they collected. And one other thing, and that is not evident, I guarantee you couldn't come up with that one either. At the time, there were these two moles still active, and they were doing damage, and they didn't know who it was. No, they weren't active. They had just been caught. Sorry, I apologize. They had just been caught. And now they were worried that there were others that they didn't know. And there was a chance that I was still running these guys. Now, knowing that that was not the case, that at least I wasn't running anybody, it's a relief. It's a negative that you rarely have proof for. There wasn't proof, but there was indication that the danger was much lower than they feared.
Did you have a sense that there was a certain amount of people like yourself that were undercover?
No.
What was your sense like that?
There was none. First of all, we never talked about others. We never talked about me meeting another agent. I was always by myself. I did not even meet my handler in person, not in the United States. I never met my handler the only place where I met my handler was in Moscow. And I didn't know that he was my handler either. There's the guy who made decisions that impacted my life. I wasn't supposed to know him, but I met him anyway. He was introduced by some other name, and he was just curious. He just wanted to meet me. But no, there was no sense that there was anybody else other than the people that I met in Moscow and some agents and all diplomats in third countries whom I met to change passports and maybe get some more travel money. But that was it. That's the only place where I met other agents where I knew that they existed.
How often were you going between the U.S. and Russia or other countries?
It was spent 10 years here. There were 4 trips leaving the U.S., coming back 4 times.
Were you concerned at all when you left the U.S. that you might not be able to get back to the U.S., or there was no thought of
No, that was not being able to get back. You know, I entered the U.S. always with forged passports. I left my own documentation in my apartment. It was very well hidden, almost impossible to find. And the only way I would not have been would not have been able to get back is if they had kept me. But I was in very, very good standing. I know that. Because every time, just before it was time to leave Moscow again, the night before, there was a banquet. I was the guest of honor. There were about 7, 8 KGB agents. Only 2 or 3 I knew. And the other ones were most likely, one of them was my handler and a couple of other, guys who were interested in taking a look at the guy who made it, because the task that I had was fundamentally impossible, to pretend to have been born in the United States. To the extent I know, all the other illegals that I'm familiar with went to the United States through other countries. Favorite countries are Brazil, still are for the Russians, by the way, and Canada. So they would become citizens based on forged documents in those countries, and then after 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years come legally to the United States. But that meant there was a red flag in their personality file. They came from someplace else. I was born in New Jersey. And that is why in 1986, just after I returned from my last visit, as I was back in New York, I was told by shortwave radio that I had just received the second highest decoration of the Soviet Union. And I'm not making this up. I have a witness. My son knows that my German wife still has that decoration. Yes, they handed that to her to make her. She was waiting for me to come home for sure and for good. It took a lot of sacrifices, and that probably was encouraging for her. And I don't know what else they told her, but I talked myself into a dead-end street, and it's one way. How do I get out? How did I get here? About the other illegals.
Yeah.
Well,
I was just curious when you're going back and forth between the U.S. and Russia. I was like, I wonder what was going on in your head.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I talked myself into it by saying that they would always let me out. It's the only way not to come back here. And I knew that. And did I have doubts that I could actually make it to Moscow? Nope. Because the agents that I met in the other countries, they were well trained. They were always on time. All the meetings happened as planned, and the passports that I used held up to scrutiny in Europe for sure. And just as an afterthought, because you can't ask that question, but the answer is very interesting. Why were these passports so good? Because they were buying them from East Germany, because German engineering. And guess who was in charge of the forgery department of the Stasi that made those passports? Was my best college friend.
No way.
Yeah, I met him many years later, and he told me that, and he said, well, I made passports you most likely used to travel on. I tell you, there's nothing normal about my life.
And I've been so impressed by your posts on LinkedIn. What do you think you've learned along the way through your life that's helping a business person, anybody on the street, right? Like anybody that's listening. The 5 or 10 people that are listening to this podcast. What do you think, like, some of the lessons you've learned along the way that'll help?
Well, first of all of this is behavioral. I cannot teach somebody what I have, but I can tell you how to behave. I do have a very logical mind, and I'm very good at eliciting stuff from people I interact with. I was pretty good at it when they didn't want to tell me. So now if they want to tell me what's on their mind, I'm pretty good at getting to the root cause of what really bothers them. So that's That helps a lot. The other thing is be alert, be watchful, take in what's going on, and really, when you interact with people, just be conscious of that interaction and just take it in, because this is how you develop your gut. As I told you, your gut is, in most cases, is not instinctive. In my case, it probably wasn't instinctive either, because I was a people watcher when I was a child. Okay? My parents would always tell me in the restaurant, "Why are you staring at these people?" So I wasn't aware of that, but so I can tell them, you can eventually develop that gut, which may well be superior to any logical decision making that you can take. And what you do with regard to assessing people that you meet, new people, and there's scientific evidence for this theory that I have. I have two friends. One is an eminent psychologist and another one is a neurologist that will agree with my thoughts, with my theory. When you watch people a lot and listen to people a lot, again, while you're doing that, the subconscious is at work. It stores a lot of signals that come from the other person, whether that is how they dress, how they speak, intonation, what they, lots and lots of things, even the words that they use. And over time, your subconscious has it can hold billions of bits of data. Subconscious has stored a bunch of avatars in here. And the avatars go with a qualitative judgment, thumbs up or thumbs down, smart or not smart. That's just very basics. I can't read minds. But I used my ability to size up individuals very, very quickly when I interviewed candidates for jobs, high-level jobs, some reporting to me anyway, because at one point I was sick and tired of the HR check-a-box interview because they were really boring. I just talked with them about any subject. So, they had a pet. We talk about dogs or birds or gardening or whatever. And my subconscious was watching and taking in all the signals. I kid you not, of the 100 plus candidates I interviewed in my last 3 years, I made only one mistake. I know people actually wanted me to, other people in the company wanted me to check on a candidate that they were going to hire. And so my track record was sort of 99%. I made one bad mistake. There was a direct report to me. That was a really, really bad decision. The guy is still in the same job, by the way. I didn't like him. Instinct said, thumbs down, because he was just not likable and sort of came across nasty, which he actually was. But what I did, I looked at his resume and we talked a little bit of his technical skills, and I sorely needed that technical skill in my environment, in my department. And it was very rare. And he didn't ask for a ton of money. So I said, I got to take him. And what I did, I let him do what he does best, but I didn't let him interact with other senior staff because he was still not a nice man. And so he was so not nice that one day, about a year and a half after he was hired, he went to the CEO and demanded that I be fired.
Oh my goodness. So,
I have strong evidence that my gut is very, very well developed. Doesn't mean I don't make mistakes. Particularly nowadays when Ronald Reagan used to say, but verify. I did most of the time not even verify. But nowadays, there is so much lying going on in society that I made a couple of mistakes, actually. Pretty bad ones that hurt me. So now it's trust but verify. But if it's on the internet, it's verify but trust. Because there are phony characters on the internet that show faces of good-looking women they're sock puppets, that's what we call them in the business in information technology. They interact with you via texting, could even be speaking nowadays, and they're not real. So the first time, and that's happened to me multiple times now, particularly with my heightened activity on LinkedIn, I got these pretty women coming after me. And luckily, I have a good friend who can check on them. And eventually, you also know that the behavior is a little bit artificial. When they move on from business talk to, and by the way, yesterday, to like social small talk. That's a bad sign. And then I sent the picture to my friend, and he uncovered about 5 of them already. And you got to wonder why a 30-year-old woman who looks to be 30 wants to be small talk with me.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but it's not like in the old days when there was no internet, there was no artificial creations. My gut did really, really well, and it's still doing well, but I make friends very quickly, and I have yet to regret those friendships.
Make friends really quickly. What do you think leads to you making friends really quickly?
Well, it starts out with me just being completely my authentic self. So, in other words, I'm not playing a role. Unless I sense that the person I'm talking with has a very negative attitude towards something that is important to me. At that point, for whatever reason, I may want to do business with them, or it's a recommendation by somebody and I want to be polite. At that point, I censor myself. But if I don't sense there's something like that there, and that I can sense pretty well, I just talk what's ever in here. And then it depends how the other person interacts. I had a talk yesterday with a business fellow. He had an interesting background, but I didn't know really what that meant. He grew up as his business initially he was a Texas Ranger. And, I'm a little bit concerned about the Texan male. They take their guns too far with them. I never touched a gun. I never shot a single bullet, so I can't relate to that. But with this fellow, it took about 5 minutes, and I spoke my mind about everything. And I even told him that I'm a Christian. And I had no problem saying that. They either would accept it or be Christians themselves. So that's how I can make friends really easily. And I collected more friends than I can handle. Friendships have to be nurtured. You need to spend time. And whatever I have the least amount of at this point in my life is time.
That's right.
So I can't overdo it but it's a blessing and a minor curse, because the blessing is that I was able to handle loneliness when I was younger. At my age, being lonely is the beginning of the end. And I'm not saying that. This is very well-researched psychological knowledge. So I'm not lonely. I had a call coming in before we talked. I'm talking to you now, and I'm going to call somebody else when we're done.
Yeah, that's wonderful. You spent so many years like pretending to be somebody else. Was there a rough transition between pretending to be your authentic self?
And not all German behavior is acceptable in American culture and vice versa. And it took me a while to figure that out, but I was still an honest guy. I was still inside of that phony bubble. I was still my authentic self. A caring individual, helping others, and just not have much anything evil inside. Because the evil that I did, I was still doing because I thought it was serving a higher purpose, so I rationalized that. But I never did anything that I was aware of that could have harmed somebody, hurt somebody else. So that was not a big deal to grow back into my authentic self. And I never grew back into the German, by the way. I'm now much more American than I'm German. I found it out when after 30 years, I was back in Germany, and I'm thinking, oh my God, that for the grace of God could be me. Germans are very aggressive,
yes,
in your face. They complain a lot.
Yep.
And so that wouldn't work with Americans, and now I don't like it anymore. So that's, it was not a huge thing to become my authentic, true self, with the one exception I already mentioned. It took me quite a while to figure out that I'm extroverted. That was a long path. I embraced my radical extroversion 2.5 years ago. But that feels good. If you can be yourself and you know who you are, it makes for a better life. It makes for a less stressful life and more fulfilling life, joyful life. I don't like the word happy, joyful life. And that's where I'm at now. And I didn't coin the phrase, but I copied it from a book. But I'm in a state of existence which I call the lightness of being.
What book?
There is a book, it's called The Lightness, The Curse or something like, there's a word before. You can find this if you Google it. I forgot what it was named. There's a word before, the something of the lightness of being. It's quite a famous book, but it has nothing to do with what I've just told you. I just copied this instinctively, and it's not used by anybody else. And so it's not copyrighted. You know what it means? It's like walking on air, emotionally, intellectually, and also spiritually. Maybe not so much intellectually at all times, because I get pretty intense. But I have, you notice this, I have a really, really well-developed sense of humor that's directed inside. And, I just like to have a laugh. And that, an intense laugh kills the intellectual intensity prior to that. As I'm talking, I'm coming up with things that I never said before. Happens all the time.
That's great, right? Isn't that beautiful?
Yep.
Where you have these realizations.
Uh-huh.
Self-realizations as you're talking about something.
Let me repeat that. Knowing who you are, who you truly are, and embracing that self is critical for a fulfilled and full life.
How many people, Americans, you spent some time here since 78, what percentage of Americans, adults, you think are in that space?
I think it's a minority. There's a lot of people who have no knowledge of self, the good part as well as the not so good part. Because I think it has a lot to do with, first of all, you need to have somebody who will be your mirror, okay? Your honest mirror. Most people don't have a person like that. It's great to have a parent, a fully functioning parent, like a father figure, but there's a dearth of father figures in this country. And even in my time, the good fathers were a rarity. And then a good friend, or possibly even, a life partner, wife or a husband. There's trickiness there involved because the male-female tension, you can't get away from it. It happens. So, and then, mentors would be really good for this, but there's not too many people who want to mentor, and there's also not too many people who want to go to the doctor, to the mentor, and find out what's wrong.
Yeah, the truth.
Oh, that's why men particularly, they don't want to go to the doctor because, they might find out something wrong. Well, good. I never had a problem going to the doctor because I'm here today talking with you because I went to the doctor early and got preventive treatment for 2 diseases that were otherwise going to be killers. So we live in a narcissistic society, and that started already when I came here. I took a course in college. It was based on a book called The Culture of Narcissism. Yeah. By a fellow written by, last name is Lasch, Lasch, and that was very prophetic. It was in the early 80s. No, early 80s. Yep, and narcissist doesn't really want to know anything that might be wrong with them.
Of course not.
Of course, that's silly. I mean, first of all, you have strengths, lots of them. Let's point them out first. Embrace those, work with them. And then, make sure that the weaknesses that you have don't get in the way.
Right.
It's really easy.
Yeah, exactly. I used to coach college tennis, and I would approach it that way from an athletic perspective. Like, what are your strengths as an athlete, and what are your weaknesses so we can address those so those don't squash or suppress your strengths?
Yeah.
It's the same as an individual.
Exactly. Like me in basketball, don't dribble. Just well, I was a forward. Just pass the ball or shoot it, but don't dribble.
Don't dribble. That's right. Know what your role is. Know what you're good at.
That's right. And, and that made me go back to the gym again and again and again because I was actually good at the tasks that I was assigned.
And what did that feel like for you?
It feels great. It's what I call an upward spiral. The success feeds upon itself because once you're successful at something, you get better at it. You embrace it. until you hit, what Maslow called the top of the pyramid was self-fulfillment. Maslow is not as popular as he used to be, but the concept is still valid, I believe. Everybody, if they're aware of who they are and become aware of who they are, getting to the pinnacle that is designed by, whether you believe in God or nature, it doesn't matter, designed by somebody else where you can land. And most people don't get there. I'm still not there, and I probably won't because, I had a lot of delay, but I'm a lot higher than I was even 5 years ago.
Yeah, you're walking the path.
Yes.
To self-active.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I don't even know if Maslow, I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Yeah.
I only heard it myself speak it.
It's funny because my uncle just sent me 15 plus books on Maslow. Yeah.
Wow.
He's getting rid of his collection, and he just sent me a bunch of his books. He was a psychologist, and he wrote his doctoral thesis, his dissertation, on Maslow. Yeah, so he had deep study on Maslow. I've got all these books on Maslow thoughts and his work. Yeah,
and again, I think the bottom line is that nowadays we are afraid of what we might find. Fear, there's so much fear in human society these days. It's not just physical. There's a lot of emotional, mental fear, and that holds you back. Fears. People ask me, was I ever afraid while I was doing the spying? No, I was afraid of my wife when she found out that I did something I wasn't supposed to do. But the spying, you can't be scared of a dangerous job that you're about to undertake, because if you're scared, you will fail. As a fireman, if they fight fires, they know that they will succeed, right? If they start hesitating, you can't. You focus on the job that needs to be done, and you know that you will do it right. Now, does it mean you will always do it right? No. But then, you learn from your mistake, as long as you don't wind up in jail, and that's too late.
Hesitation will cause your worst fears to come true, right?
Yeah.
Well, this has been incredible, Jack. I so appreciate it. Now, there's a book about you.
Yeah, it's called Deep Undercover, and with a subtitle, Mixed or Something Allegiances. It's a subtitle, but Deep Undercover by. People can find it. It's still on Amazon. And there's tons and tons of podcasts, and there's another one here.